Okay, so welcome everyone to our discussion about the power of inclusive design. I genuinely think this is such an important topic, inclusivity and accessibility, and I'm delighted to welcome Sam from P&G and Ben from Airbnb. We've got pretty much all the alphabet covered there, guys, I think, to talk about this important topic. So if I just very briefly give an introduction to each of you, and Sam, you are P&G's company accessibility leader, leading the company's thought leadership and commitment to making products, packaging, and advertising accessible to the aging population and the 1.3 billion people around the world with a disability. So brilliant to have you. Thank you for joining us here at the Global Innovation Forum. And Ben, we've had the pleasure of your company for the last 2 years, I think. So it's brilliant to have you as a repeat offender, as it were. And you're the inclusive design lead for Airbnb, using design thinking to help everyone create more inclusive products and services. And you lead the cross-functional product team dedicated to solving problems like racism, sexism, and bias. So again, welcome, guys. Lovely to have you. And yeah, what an important discussion, especially in the context of 2020.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
So listen, I'd love to just kick off and understand how you both got into these lines of work. I mean, they're fascinating jobs. Were they there waiting for you when you joined? How did you get into this? Sam, maybe we could start with you.
Hey, sure, yeah. So I've always been passionate about making the world that much more accessible because I'm blind, and growing up, things, whether it was education or playing, social stuff or anything personal or professional, it wasn't naturally built accessibly. So I came from a background of always trying to make things more accessible. I started my career in digital and IT at P&G. So for the first 15 years of my career, I wasn't really doing accessibility as my main job,
right.
But I was able to convince the CEO and the senior leadership in the company that this is a very important area. And that's how I managed to get into this newly created position as of last year.
Fantastic. And so you really helped shape this to a degree.
Absolutely. Total white space, being able to go and change the world as I wanted to do. The biggest complainer, and now it's my job to fix it too.
Good. Well, the unreasonable person is the one who shapes the world. So that's great. And Ben, what about you?
I mean, different from Sam, I actually didn't always have an interest in this space. For me, it was really born out of a reckoning, a moment of realization I had as a designer, where at a certain point, I looked back at the body of work that I had designed for clients around the world, and I realized that I hadn't really used any faces that looked like mine. Like the dominant amount of stock photos and things that I had used were not really representing the world that either I'm from or that we all inhabit. It was a very specific lens. And that for me was kind of this moment of, oh, why am I not representing the world as it is? Why is there such a lack of diversity within my own work? Yeah. And this kind of happened at the same time when I was traveling a lot. And working in different cultures. And so I'd begun the process of writing, what is it like to design for cultures and within cultures that you're not part of? And how do we start to bridge those gaps? And, one of your earlier questions was this job waiting for us? I mean, at Airbnb, it wasn't. What was waiting was a problem. The problem where there was a realization that different groups were having different experiences based upon their perceived race. And all of these kind of things came together at the same point where I was traveling and writing and working about inclusivity, inclusive design. There was this rising problem in 2016 within Airbnb, and they were looking for someone to lead a product team that is trying to tackle problems like disparate impact. And so they'd seen my work, reached out, and I made the decision to say yes, that, this for me felt more like a calling at that point, that I can actually use these skills and this insight to see, can we shape products and services so that they are more inclusive, so that they resonate with communities and identities around the world.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure you've both made huge impacts, but it's a massive culture change piece, right? And Sam, you talked about convincing the CEOs and the leadership that this was an issue. Ben, clearly for Airbnb, they woke up to the fact that this was an issue.
Yes.
Now, I'm struck by the scale of the challenge for both of you. I mean, P&G, Sam, I think when we were talking beforehand, and let me get this right, you talked about it's over 100,000 employees operating in over 300 countries. And Ben, Airbnb, whilst it's a smaller company, you've got probably, I don't know, millions of hosts. You're serving millions of guest nights every year. Where do you get started with a challenge like this? Ben, maybe you could kick us off on this one.
Sure. I mean, it's kind of fascinating, this idea of changing culture, because coming in the door when I joined, I actually came in with a very narrow focus, which is, can we change product so that we're encouraging our community to be more inclusive of one another? And along that journey, we really uncovered that there's a lot of insights, a lot of ways that we can change product that will actually achieve this goal. But none of those product changes will last or have the kind of scale of impact we want unless we actually shift our culture internally. We can't change external culture until we have, really changed our own internally. And so for me, it was really about seeing how can we use these insights that we've gained from shipping product and kind of like bring them back inside of Airbnb. So how can we figure out, the way that we've changed our digital platform? Can we then abstract a layer of insights that we can then use to empower all of our ICs, our individual contributors, our managers, our leadership? Like, can we give them the awareness, knowledge, and incentives that they need to actually build inclusively at scale? And so in that way, we are kind of building this shared awareness and responsibility for these changes. So yeah, the way that I very much have approached it has been through product. It has kind of been, instead of focusing inside and then out, it's been how can we focus outside and then bring that in.
Interesting. Sam, what about you?
Well, interestingly, in my experience, what I discovered was that this is actually a very strong business case. This is actually inclusive design is a business building opportunity. If we can design more accessibly, then we're opening our products or advertising or buildings or anything that touches our consumers or our employees. If it's inclusively designed, that means more people can use it easily and more delightfully. So the big opportunity so that's a no-brainer, but the pivotal moment was when I realized that not everyone realizes this. So, you don't grow up, like typical people don't interact with people with disabilities on a day-to-day, like from going to school, how many people do you meet on a daily basis, or at work, how many people do you see with a disability? Not many. So once I started getting senior leadership put in the shoes of different types of people with different types of disabilities and got them to interact with our products, got them to interact in our buildings, our offices, and look at our advertising from the perspective of people with different types of disabilities, it was really like eye-opening for them. And it was a big aha moment. So for me now, my job's really easy. Like, everybody wants it. Everybody wants to do this. They want to do it well. And I'm really seeing that in just a couple of years, the culture is changing. People want to do this, they realize now, and very soon this will become extremely professionally executed as well.
So I'm really struck, empathy is a big kind of factor in how we try and work with our clients. And what you're talking about there is getting your leadership to empathize with people from different perspectives. How do you go about that? How do you get them to see the world from a different point of view, to experiencing some of those things in a way that they perhaps wouldn't in their everyday life?
I did a couple of things. Like, we ran this thing called a disability challenge, where we physically got, our CEO wearing simulation glasses that, you know, simulates different types of sight loss. We got them to wear arthritic gloves and, you know, try and read our packaging, try and open our packaging and see whether it was easy or difficult. And there's certain products that we had naturally designed that were so easy to use, like, you know, our Ariel pods or Tide pods in the US, because you don't have to, you know, dose them. You just lift a pod and it's pre-dosed. You just put it in the machine. So you can do it with one hand, and that's very helpful for someone with dexterity challenges. It's also helpful for people with sight loss because you're not spilling anything. And it's also helpful for people with learning difficulties as well, because again, they don't need to worry about how much to dose. And then in contrast, there was many other products that were not very accessible, you know, that were harder to open. So that was one way we did it. And other things that we're doing in the company to kind of raise empathy and awareness is we're asking people in the company to share their personal stories, to share, you know, their journey and acquiring or living with a disability personally and professionally. So, and I think by having these kind of situations where people are talking about real challenges or real opportunities for the business, it's showing us that, you know, there's so much that we can do here.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's so powerful. Ben, was it a kind of error of omission for Airbnb? I mean, you know, I'm sure it's a business full of great people who want to do great things, but was this just a, you know, when you're in the majority, speaking as a white sort of, as a white male, you don't notice some of these things sometimes, often. Is that the challenge that you faced as well? Was this? Yeah.
It very much is. No, it very much is that. And, you know, I think it speaks to the fact that all of us as humans, we all have biases. And it's our biases is what give us these lenses on the world where we are more likely to focus on people who we believe to look or think or act or behave as we do. And so we all have this inability to, you know, really keep this broad focus on a very wide amount of diverse individuals as we're building. And so then we see that, you know, that we build based upon our own biases. And in doing so, we bake them into the products and services that we build. And then because technology is so powerful, we have effectively scaled our biases through the products and services we built. And in doing so, we've disproportionately affected those who don't fit specific groups or identities. And that is something that is a ongoing challenge, I think, for every single company. It's not that, you know, generally in my experience, it's not that people are bad or that they don't care about a wide variety of people. And as Sam said, you know, who doesn't want what they built to resonate with the widest amount of people? It's great for business. We all want this, but there's this gap, this intent to impact kind of gap.
I think the reason, sorry to interrupt, Ben, but I was just wanting to comment on that gap. I think the reason there is that gap is because historically the designers or the people, the decision makers haven't recognized that need for accessibility. So things have been designed without accessibility, a bit like baking a cake. So they've designed something, they've baked something without accessibility. Now we're realizing, oh, wait a minute, things need to be accessible. We get it now. But going back and fixing things is a bit more challenging. That's the challenge, I think, that companies have, because they're now got this infrastructure of stuff that maybe isn't accessible, and they need to go back and make it accessible. So therefore, like what you're doing, Ben, with inclusive design, designing things from the beginning with accessibility will make it a no-brainer, because it won't cost more and it won't take that much extra effort to go back and fix things.
Absolutely. No, I agree with that completely. And I'm sure you're as aware of I am of this idea of moving things further to the left, that inclusion is solved at the design stage. And so the sooner that we can get people thinking in these terms and broadening that worldview, the more likely we are to actually be able to ship products that are accessible, that meet accessibility guidelines, that are progressively more and more and more inclusive. You know, we have to get to people at the thinking phase of this. And that to me is where, you know, arguably some of the biggest challenges are. One of the kind of more complicated things that I'm struggling with in inclusive design is that by its nature, inclusive design is actually against our biological programming. Like as humans, we have a bias towards excluding. If you think of it, you know, in your day-to-day, you exclude far more people than you include because there just isn't enough time to bring every single person you meet or work with into your worldview. So we have a bias towards exclusion, towards a narrowing of focus. And so, but the whole act of inclusive design is saying, no, actually do the opposite of that. Introduce more friction in your thinking so that you can broaden your worldview, slow down instead of speeding up so that you can be more thoughtful about what you're doing, both in the short term and in the long term. And so there's this tension that we have between, you know, and again, this is the tension that sits at the core of this intent impact gap, where we want to do the right thing, but biologically we have a bias towards actually being more exclusionary. So we have to find a way to work with and hold this tension. And I believe that the way that we do that is by moving things further upstream and finding ways to, you know, not just raise awareness, as Sam said, but actually incentivize people to do this work by the systems that we have within companies.
And I think the thing is that there is a massive incentive. If you think about it, Tom, you said it was 1.3 billion, but that number is growing and it's currently at 1.85 billion people now. If we design inclusively, we're automatically including that 1.8 billion group of people with a disability. That group of people has a massive disposable income, like of 8 trillion. So it's like another market. It's like going, you know, why would you exclude selling to maybe like China? It's even bigger than China now, right? So I think the business incentive is really clear. Like, you make something accessible, you'll get a larger market share. Like, it's that simple.
Well,
please go ahead.
I was going to say, and Ben, I'm about to quote you. So Ben, when he came and presented at GIF a couple of years ago, gave a question to us, which is, you know, who are we missing, right? Ben, I don't want to misquote you. But and genuinely, I thought that was one of the most powerful questions I've ever heard. You know, who are we missing? Because Sam, you're absolutely right. That business case is unarguable, but until you recognize it, because of, as human beings, we have the availability bias, right? We look around us and we see lots of people who are mainly like us, and so we think we're dominant. You know, everything else is sort of a, you know, tiny, not worth bothering about. And it's only when you start to gather that data together and you start to look at, this is a bigger audience than China potentially, or is not even potentially, that it starts to gather that momentum.
What makes it very hard, you know, what accentuates your bias is that for every other kind of diversity vector, you can see it's a male or female, you know, older or younger, or black and white. When it comes to disability, like 70% of disabilities are invisible. So we can't even see that, you know, on a day-to-day, because most of the disabilities are invisible. So that makes our job harder, but it doesn't mean it's not possible to do.
No, absolutely. I think that's a really important point as well.
I would also add into that although the business case it's apparent, it's there, it's obvious that there are billions of people who we can connect our products and services with if we are more inclusive. That, in my experience, doesn't resonate on the individual level. Like conceptually, we can't connect with the idea of a billion people. And so that as an incentive to drive action on the individual level doesn't always inspire the kind of action we want it to. If it did, we would have been building towards accessibility a very long time ago. Like it's a very obvious thing. And so something that I also try and pair that with is bringing it down to the immediate, that by building in a more inclusive way, it makes you, the person doing the building, whether you're in marketing, sales, engineering, design, it actually makes you better at doing what you do. Like, who doesn't want their products and services to resonate? Like, me as a designer, I want my work to resonate with as many people as possible.
Yeah.
And so I find that by connecting the more immediate incentives for me, with the people I work with, it helps, again, bridge that gap between what is a very important number, billions of users, but down to the more individual, the self-serving nature of this work. And I don't think it's a downside to have that pairing there together, that people need to answer the question, what's in it for me? Because fundamentally as humans, we are self-serving.
Yeah, and I think to do that, it's really important to meet people with the different types of disabilities on a one-on-one, or and get those insights face to face if possible, or remotely nowadays. But once you meet people and talk to them and understand, how do you use my product when you only have one hand or you can't see properly, how do you do those things? And by asking those questions, by observing people with disabilities and how they're using your products, I think it really helps to get the insights that designers and other people on the team need to know to make those modifications. So totally agree with you there, Ben.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point, because that idea of, again, being able to experience the world as another experiences it, that can come through, as you say, getting your CEO to put on glasses and gloves and sort of get in a wheelchair, even, whatever it might be, or it can just come from spending time with people, because you have this sort of, the idea, as you say, Ben, 1.8 billion people is a statistic, but actually just sharing real time with one or two individuals is what touches us more at a human level. And then, to your point, if you can make it personal as well, that's very powerful.
Yeah,
I want to, if I may, sorry, we can carry on there. Yeah. But I want to touch on this year, because it feels like with COVID, and there's clearly an inequality in COVID. And I think, obviously, with the Black Lives Matter movement and the murder of George Floyd, there's been an acceleration in recognizing, seemingly, and maybe you'll tell me it's skin deep and no more, but the importance of inclusivity and, to a degree, accessibility as well. Do you feel that we're at a tipping point? Do we feel like we're at a really important moment here? Ben, maybe kick us off.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I think we're at an important moment, but I also think, as you actually alluded to earlier on, that there are multiple important moments, that this is an ongoing process, and that, really, the way that I see it, the more connected we become due to technology, the more aware of both our similarities and our differences we become. We become aware that although it's easier to exist in this echo chamber, the walls of this chamber keep being confronted, pushed down, knocked down by these larger social and community movements, these reckonings that we have, and exist within every historically marginalized community, or should I say, come from them. And these are the moments where it requires us to really look within and say, who are we, and what is the world that we want to build going forward? And these become critical moments in, not just the creation of our companies and our products and our services, but also in our culture. Which direction do we want to go down? Do we want to be more inclusive? Do we want to focus more on community and collaboration? Or do we want to be potentially more individualistic, or potentially even more nationalist? Like, which direction? And we see this, as you said, not just with George Floyd and the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. We see it in Brexit, the way that it's happening. We see it in these moments of reckoning with climate change, the disasters that we're seeing around the world because of that. COVID as another example. And these are the moments where we can make a decision to kind of accelerate our progress towards a world in which we all feel included, or not. And I think that it's incredibly important that we are prepared to act in these moments, because as often is the case in history, those who are the most prepared to act are the ones who define the outcomes, who decide the society in which we will all live in for years to come.
That's very interesting. Is it easier to be prepared to act, or actually maybe it's easier to resist? You know, so do we need a plan for preparedness? What are the kind of practical ways that we as innovators and the kind of the people watching this can start to put themselves in a position to be prepared to act? Have you guys got any tips, Sam, maybe that you could share?
I think for me, there's two key things that companies should consider. Like, firstly, like companies should really create an open and inclusive environment for all employees so that they can truly share their knowledge and experiences, whether they're Black, whether they're gay, disabled, or all of the above, you know, by harnessing a culture that is letting people be their unique self in a united way, I think is extremely powerful, and it will help companies to listen and to take action. And then the second thing I think that we need to do is formalize our commitment to inclusivity. So there's no point just talking about it. It's really good to put some action steps down and make some commitments that then helps you to achieve those commitments or goals, you know, and for everybody in that company.
What about you, Ben?
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree completely. I mean, I think the very first step of this, echoing what Sam said, is that you need to have a degree of awareness. You have to admit that there is a problem, that people are being excluded, before you can really kind of take action or be prepared to take action towards inclusion. And so I think exactly, you know, recapping what we've said here, up until this point, like doing things like user research, bringing people from historically underinvested communities into your process so that you develop this empathy, this shared understanding. Then actually being proactive and starting making a case for why we should change what we're doing so that it connects with audiences or lifts up those who have historically been marginalized by the work that we do. And I think that in doing this process, we're weaving a story, and stories as a really great uniter are the things that will create the right foundation for the kind of change that we're talking about. So we're building this narrative by continually bringing people into our process, by fighting for more representation and diversity around the table when decisions are being made, by holding these stories close, by pairing not just this empathy-driven story, but these business cases, so that when these tipping points, these moments occur, we are poised to take action. And we also have a network of allies who can not just push us forward, but hold us accountable to acting in accordance with our mission, our values, in acting in accordance with building towards a world in which we all feel like we belong.
Are there any people who you've seen do this really well? There was a lot of criticism around companies during Black Lives Matter, you know, putting up an Instagram post and saying, you know, we stand by you, whilst their boards were all white, say. You know, are you seeing anyone who you'd hold up as, apart from Airbnb and P&G, of course, who you'd hold up as being really great sort of case studies or examples of how they're driving this forward?
I think there's a lot of companies who are recognizing that they have to step up and be much more inclusive in all sense. And I'm seeing it, you know, there's so many companies, a lot of the tech companies, and many other companies, you're beginning to see the shift in the culture. You're beginning to see the shift in society as well. And, you know, but there's so much more that we need to do. It's just a you know, I would say a step in the right direction. We've got you know, 1,000 more steps to go.
Yeah,
but we're going in the right direction.
Some specific companies that immediately jump to mind for me are Nike's been doing a great job at this for a very long period of time. Like, you know, it was only the other day I actually went back and looked at, you know, the Wayback Machine on all of the previous versions of their site and previous campaigns, and they've actually brought in a lot of diversity and representation along this idea of everyone being an athlete. they've had this for a very long period of time, which I've always found quite fascinating. And then companies like Patagonia have been doing a wonderful job of being really mission driven, and being unafraid to stand on those missions. And we've seen, the change and the benefits that they have reaped because of that. No one can find a horrible thing to say about them because they're acting in accordance with values and a mission that we all do believe in. So yeah, those are two examples that immediately jump out. But there are, as Sam said, there are loads who are doing very subtle but quite significant things that is easy to miss. But we are generally trending in the right direction.
So guys, this has been a fascinating conversation, hugely rich. And I'd just like to bring it to a close with a sort of note of optimism, hopefully, and looking to the future. What do you see as the biggest opportunity to really sort of step change this thing? What's the next thing that companies and innovators should be thinking about doing? Sam, maybe I can start with you.
I think scaling up what's already perceived as excellent in the industry. So one example is that there's a service called audio description that any kind of video content has. So it's basically a description of what's going on the screen, and it's something that blind people can turn on their video, on their TV. And today, only a very small percentage of content is audio described, and it doesn't cost a lot to do, and it's not complex. However, there's not that much scale in this, so blind people are still missing out, and it's an amazing feature, an amazing service. And again, I think the reason we don't have full-scale adoption in doing it is that content creators, whether it's advertisers or TV or film producers, they don't always know about the service of audio description. And I would particularly focus on advertisers because P&G was the first advertiser to do audio description on their ads, and not many other companies are still doing it, and I would really encourage them. It's cheap, easy to do. So yeah.
And as you say, I mean, if you don't do it, you're missing out on a really significant audience. So you're getting more bang for your buck, as it were, with a simple investment, by the sounds of things.
Yeah, there's so many ads that I see, and I'm wondering, because I can't, obviously, I only can listen to them. I don't know who even the company is. So they've invested a lot of money in that. They're blind people who are watching those ads, 253 million globally, wouldn't have a clue what that ad is. So it's really important to do it.
Well, it's a bad metaphor, but my parents, I know, find sometimes the hearing, on the TV difficult. And I remember they watched The Wire with subtitles, but that may say more about the Baltimore sort of accents as well. But Sam, audio description in advertising then is something that we should all go and talk to our marketeers, our agencies, our partners, and really encourage this as a way forward. Thank you.
Absolutely.
That's a lovely practical one. Ben, from your perspective?
I think for me, the biggest opportunity that I see is really the opportunity to start having honest and authentic conversations about this topic. Historically, this work has really been kind of constrained to the mind space of the few people at any given company who want to take on this work. But as we're progressing, both in society, within our individual companies, the awareness of this work is coming more and more to the front. And so I think that we have this opportunity to really start having these honest conversations about these topics, to bring the kind of awareness that we need in order to take action, to actually normalize, embracing and making inclusive decisions.
And what do you think's the barrier? What are we overcoming? Is it nervousness on the part of the people who are worried they might put a foot wrong or say the wrong thing? What is it that is stopping those conversations?
I think it's exactly as you said. It's all of those things. It is, are we the fear that are we the only ones who are thinking in this way? Are we sticking our neck out to be talking in these kinds of ways? Are we ruffling the wrong kinds of feathers? It's almost this fear of expressing this deep need that we all have for inclusion, for fear that by expressing it, we will be, calling people to task, calling people out. And so there's a fear that means that we are more likely to embrace the status quo, which is, again, rooted in more exclusion than inclusion. And I think that's something that we can push against now more and more over time. And in doing so, that's where we get to unlock, all of the wonderful, joyful parts of inclusive action.
Guys, that has been such a fabulous discussion. I know we've very much at the tip of the iceberg, but if people can go away from this conversation and just make some of those steps that you've discussed, both culturally and Ben, as you say, sort of having those conversations with one another, talking to people within their companies, talking to customers, having more diverse representation and research, which is an area we're in, I think is very important. And Sam, as you say, there are some really practical actions that we can take, whether that's with advertising, whether that's with making websites accessible, packaging accessible, to make the world a more inclusive place. And that's good for humanity, but it's also good for business. Mm-hmm. So Sam Latif from P&G, Ben Evans from Airbnb, thank you so much for joining us at GIF this year. And I wish you the very best of luck in your mission.